And unfortunately, that stigma is perpetuated in churches, but it shouldn't be anymore. Go to counseling, talk to somebody. You don't have to hide how you're really feeling because you're an elder in the church or a pastor
Mhm.
or a leader or an attender or a member or because people think you have it all together spiritually. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Church Chat. This is the podcast where we have conversations about ministry that you wish you were having. Real guests, real conversations about real stuff in ministry. Today's episode is sponsored by Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. That's teds.edu/church chat. We are so thankful for their sponsorship. My name is Josh, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Emily, and today's guest is an avid fisherman. He has always great looking hair, and he's surprisingly funny. Josh Ott, yay, you're our guest.
Hey, this is a little weird.
It's a bait and switch.
It's a bait and switch, and I'm the guest, and I feel a little strange about it. It's the same microphone, but somehow I feel like I'm on the other side of it.
I know, it's
And
very cool.
also, what is up with surprisingly funny?
Okay, we can get to it a little bit more when we start talking about really what we're talking about today. But, well, spoiler alert, you wrote a book, and I read it,
Yeah.
and I laughed out loud like not just once, like multiple times while reading this book. And I like know that you're like you have a sense of humor, but like you legit like are surprisingly funny. Or, I mean, not surprisingly,
Okay.
but you're
Okay.
really
If
funny.
you just
So
said funny, I'd be like, yeah, thanks. Let's appreciate that. Surprisingly, it's the part that threw me. Like you didn't
I think
expect
okay,
it to
I
be.
think it's because in the work that we do together, you are the strategy guy. Like you're always like forward thinking, kind of
Yeah.
serious vision casting, and I don't always like experience your humor side of it, even though I know that you are a funny person and you appreciate
I
humor.
try. I love humor and I
Hmm.
love comedy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have a goal, maybe now that this book is out of the way, to do a stand-up comedy set. I actually have a note in my phone. Yeah, I'd like to hit up. There's an open mic night in Harrisburg, and
Really?
I've been playing with the idea.
Oh my gosh,
I
that is
shouldn't
so
put that.
fun.
That should not be out in the
No,
public
I
on
that's
this
going to be our cold
podcast.
open that Josh Ott wants to do stand-up comedy. That's so cool.
Uh,
So do you have like a little notebook with like ideas
I
and
just on my
whatnot?
phone, yeah, stuff that I think is. I just take little notes on my phone, and I'm not trying to do it like as a career change. So I'm just trying to build like one solid set.
Yeah, that is really cool.
I
Maybe
don't
at
know. Maybe
next
I won't.
year's conference, you can be the between session entertainment,
Uh, I
or
don't
you and
know.
Ashley can do like
Oh
a
yeah,
set
for those of you that
together.
don't know, we had a
Hmm.
guest on here, Ashley, who did a
Has done
stand-up.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that was a good episode.
It was. Go back and listen. But again, we are very excited to talk to you. I'm very excited to talk to you about your book. It's all about mental health, feelings, and
Mm.
we're going to get into it. But because you are officially our guest now, I'm going to make you do something we make all of our guests do to introduce themselves. Two truths and a lie. And I'm a little bit nervous that there's a lot of pressure for me to get these
You
right.
have to get it right, and you're not really competing against anybody. I
I
guess though
know.
somehow you're still competing against me.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can stump me.
I also know, like, man, why do we do that? Like, this was the hardest part of preparing for this podcast was trying to
Yeah.
come up, and it was extra complicated. We've been working together for a while. A lot of conversations with a lot of people
Hmm.
where I blab a lot of stuff. So part of it was what stories have you heard and what stories have you not heard?
Yep. We'll see if I can.
I have a little fear and trepidation that you might have heard these before, or maybe not. Maybe I've thrown so much garbage stories out there into the world that all of these might be a little convoluted. Okay, so here the three are. I've tried to learn from our best guests how to do this well.
Yep.
And if I had to pick a best guest for this
Okay.
game, it would have to be Tony Hunt. And I don't think
Yeah.
I can live up to his standard of two truths and a lie because I still laugh when I think about that conversation. But here you go. One time I survived a snowstorm in a snow cave.
Okay.
I was placed on chapel probation my senior year at Trinity. And I have dated my wife since high school.
Can I have a follow-up question about that last one?
Absolutely not.
Okay, because I do know that Jen, you guys did date in high school. Like you knew her in high school, you dated her in high school, and then she broke up with you. And I believe you referenced this in the book, but I already also knew that. And then you like went your separate ways and then came back together. If we're letter of the lawing it, then that would be the lie because you have not dated since high school,
Mm.
which would mean that I 100% believe that Trinity put you on chapel probation. 100% could see that. That's the snow cave that's throwing me off just a little bit though. But I think I'm going to go with the letter of the law and say that you have not, I mean, I'm going to fight you on this if this is not the lie because you did not date
Yeah.
Jen since high school.
Yeah,
So that's the
shoot.
lie.
That's a lie. And I forgot. Here's the thing. I totally forgot I mentioned that in the book.
Yeah.
I put that in the book to add a little lighthearted moment to what was a pretty heavy chapter.
Yes. Yeah. And you, again, you
So
do a
it
good job
wasn't
of
like a
that.
main point. It was just like a, hey, this is
An
pretty
aside.
hard.
Mhm.
Here's something funny that may keep you from spiraling as you read
Yeah.
it. Shoot, man, I blew it. I have not blown it as bad as some of our guests have.
Our district superintendent,
Just last
Cedric Brown.
yeah, yeah, that was a good one. That was a great conversation, by the way.
It was
Yeah,
great. And if you
so
have not listened, definitely go back and listen.
I had to listen to 48 hours of chapel cassette tapes in the library and take notes on each session so that I could graduate.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I like just didn't go. I moved off campus like my junior year into my
Yeah.
senior year, and I just never my classes weren't like lined up. I was never on campus during chapel time. So I dug a really big hole. I found some like man, like that's when I really got into Crawford Loritz though. He had that
Really?
period of his time, like he had spoken a lot. Yeah, I found these like guys that I really liked and I just like embraced it
So,
and
yeah,
jumped
silver
into it.
lining.
And the snow cave thing was a fun adventure that turned into an emergency. So you know that guy in the book I talk about going deep into the like mine with?
Chad.
Yeah, so Chad, I think he's the only person I mentioned by name in the book. So Chad and I were hiking up this outside of this park in the Rockies, Estes Park. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I have, yes.
Yeah, and there's like this side around. It's not like the main park, but it was in the park, and then there was like this huge like lake up at 13,000 feet with this big snowdrift that was typically off it. Well, we were hiking up to this place, and the weather was supposed to be like fantastic, and it was a beautiful day. And looking back at pictures, you could see the storm moving in, like in the background of pictures. We just were absolutely not paying attention to it.
Oh,
Chad was getting hypothermia. I had elevation sickness. We survived what is the most miserable night of my life, almost, most miserable night of my life in a snow cave. Yeah. And had to carve our way back out the next
oh
morning.
gosh, that is gnarly.
Yeah, it was a wild, wild night.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had a lot of wild experiences with Chad.
Yeah.
Well, I am truly super excited to have this conversation. You wrote a book. It's right here.
Hey,
It will
there it
probably be,
is.
it's a great book. And I can't wait to talk about it with you.
I was nervous to see what you thought about it. One, because you have an eye for this kind of thing, and two, you read a lot of
I
books.
do. Yeah, and I get that. Other than like it's, and I think I probably would shoot you straight if it was like a terrible book, but
Yeah,
it's a great book.
I would hope we wouldn't be having this conversation
Yeah, that's
on.
probably true. Um, but one thing, I mean, I want to know some of the backstory of the
Hmm.
book. But one thing I love about this book is that one, it's very distinctly you. Like I can hear you say all of these things. And I think it's born out of it is born out of your personal experience, which is really cool and makes it very authentic. So, why did you even decide to write a book?
I think there's part of me that always like entertained the idea of writing a book one day, but I don't know if I ever really took it that seriously. And then some people around me started saying like, "Hey, after sermon series or something that they were like, hey man, we wish we had this in print, can you do something about that?" So I've always kind of played around with the idea, but I don't think I ever took it seriously. Like I've heard some of our other mutual friends that have written books say like I've never viewed myself as an author, and like I definitely don't view myself as a writer. I view myself maybe as a communicator.
Hmm.
And so I kind of looked at it like, well, this is one more medium to communicate in, and maybe there's something that needs to be out there. So I've done a couple sermon series, and the start of this was like in 2020, I think. I did a series just on feelings and talked a lot about some of the stuff in each chapters. That sermon
Hmm.
series was called All the Feels. I almost
Okay.
forgot what it was right.
Which we can link to, which would be fun
Yeah.
if people wanted.
And then the feedback from that was so incredibly powerful and encouraging and humbling. In fact, one of the biggest pieces of feedback is in the intro, an email I
Mhm.
got. And that's when I thought, like, okay, I think I'm gonna do this as a book form. And so, I worked on a little bit and then I set it aside and thought this is a stupid idea, which is a part of the journey. It took like 4 years from
Yeah.
then to like really get it out there. And half the time I wanted to throw it out. I think what kept me going is like, even if nobody buys this book, this stuff I want my kids to hear about me, from me, about our
Hmm.
faith in a very authentic way. And maybe that'll help them, and maybe it'll help some other people who feel stuck in like the shadows of church life, or these things aren't maybe something you can't talk about. And I've learned as a pastor, me talking about my own experiences with mental health stuff gives permission for other people and courage, I think, for other people to talk about their stuff too. I don't know, that's maybe a convoluted kind of answer to your question, but it was messy. The whole thing was messy.
Yeah, because feelings are messy and we are
Yeah.
messy people. So, embracing all of it, I think people can read into where that came from. But you did
Yeah.
say that it kind of it was an evolution to get to that title.
Yeah, so like I did that. I did that series in 2020 called All the Feels. I didn't really want to name the book that because it just didn't feel like that felt like a good title for the sermon series. There's stuff in this book that's not in that series that was just kind of like the inspiration behind the whole thing. So in my mind, I'm playing with the title. And then at some point, I revisited that series last year, I think, and it wasn't a revisit of the series. It was just mental health issues and stuff like that, and that was called "I'm Fine."
Mm.
And like that's what we say when people
Yeah. Oh,
ask us.
yeah.
That's what I say. Like if I say I'm fine, that means I'm not fine.
Oh, yeah. Tim knows to ask a follow-up question if I
Oh
say
yeah.
I'm fine. Like, oh, really? Are you? Hmm.
Yeah, so and I didn't want to use that as a title either. So it's just looking for something that like gave me courage and other people courage. Like it's okay to embrace all of it. And your faith embraces all of it. Not just the good stuff, not just the fun stuff, not just the when you're feeling it, and you get the I don't know, Holy Ghost goosebumps or whatever, but this is about the mess too. And until we embrace that, we don't really get to see what God does in the middle of it.
Mm. Yeah, I feel like people are super averse to feelings in general, like either feeling their feelings or processing their feelings. Why do you think that is?
It's scary, especially to admit stuff to ourselves
Hmm.
and talk to stuff to other people. There's like two parts to it. It's hard for me to admit to you what I'm really feeling. Anybody, you being anybody.
Yeah.
It's also really hard to admit to myself what I'm really, really
Mm.
feeling. And it takes a lot of reflection and work to get to a place where you can find it safe to be able to admit that to yourself first, and then this fear of rejection from other people. And I think that's like the biggest, that's why the first chapter is fear. It's not my favorite chapter. It's not, I didn't have the most fun writing that one. I don't even think it's the best chapter in there. But after that, like first chapter, which is it's called About Feelings, the first like feeling we jump into is fear. And that's
Right.
because like that's the thing I think that keeps us from really getting to the feelings that we need to address.
And the skeptic in me is kind of like, well, why bother digging? Because it's painful and hard and scary to peel back layers and address feelings. Why bother?
Yeah, I think that's like how most of us live most of the time. That's how I lived until all of a sudden a panic attack came in the middle of nowhere and I thought I was dying and having a heart attack, and all of these feelings that I had been burying and not dealing with appropriately came like boiling physically to the surface. And that's how God's designed us. It's all heart, soul, and mind, right? Like it's all connected. I think it's a fair thing to say, well, I don't want to deal with my feelings, or I don't want to talk about this stuff. But eventually it catches up to you. And even if you're ignoring it, improperly processed feelings are affecting your relationships, your kids, your circle, your job, your it's all just waiting to boil over.
Mm.
And so I think, I spent so much of my time avoiding my real feelings and choosing to kind of like put them into safer feeling categories, right? So I'm not afraid, I'm angry. I'm not depressed, I'm disappointed.
Mm.
Like
Hmm.
and then those feelings feel safe for me to talk about. And I can tell somebody I'm angry or I'm disappointed, and I'm avoiding the real stuff that's going on in my heart, and usually fracturing other relationships along the way too.
Yeah, and what I found too is like all of that takes time. Yesterday, by the end of the day, I was getting angry. Like I was feeling angry. I was being grumpy. And I could have just passed it off like I just am, I don't know, I'm having a bad day or whatever. But I knew like there's really no reason for me to be angry. And it took like intentional time to sit down and like by myself and just like think through, okay, why am I expressing what I'm feeling through? What is the real issue? And it is frustrating that it does take time. Like you can't just those things don't just like come to you, but they're worthwhile to do.
It does take time and it is hard, but it does get easier.
That's
So
true.
like I think I talk about it in the book. Like I get angry when my kids get hurt.
Mm,
And it was
yeah, you
just
do
like
talk about it.
it would be a mess. Like talk about just an absolute mess. I would cause so much extra pain and frustration for everybody in my house. And I just never worked that muscle to really understand that.
Mm,
No, I'm not really angry that my kids are hurt. I'm scared that something terrible is going to happen to them. And that goes a lot deep into my past and some of my other experiences and
mm,
stuff. But I'll tell you what, since like acknowledging that and realizing that, embracing it, and then, adding that into how does my faith, what does my faith have to say about that? And what's reality have to say about that? Like, it's gotten easier to the point where I catch it faster, and I don't have to sit down and think it through. It's just something that, because I've worked that muscle, it's just a lot easier to flex, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, one of you, since you mentioned faith, one of the first things I underlined in this book, and it's like one of those nuggets that will stick with me, is you said, all I can say is that you're speaking of Jesus, has revolutionized how I feel about everything, and he is revolutionizing how I deal with everything I feel. And I feel like as Christians, we often stop like after that first part of the sentence that like,
Yeah.
yes, when we accept Jesus, like he has revolutionized how we view things.
Right.
But do we let him stir that same revolution in how we deal with our feelings? That's like a wild nuance that I don't think people like really
Yeah.
settle into.
And that last part is like a work in progress, like
Hmm.
taking what I know about Jesus and my faith and what he says about how I feel, and then actually trying to work it out in real life. I think that's where this whole book kind of is sort of is an expression of my journey on that last part.
Mm.
It's okay, if Jesus is going to revolutionize how I deal with everything that I feel, I have to just dive into that with courage and honesty and expose the messiness of my heart and not be satisfied with just going like, oh, I know what my faith says and I know that there's grace for this mess, but maybe Jesus doesn't want me just to live in the mess. Maybe there's a better way for him to get into that and help me process and deal and walk through those kind of feelings.
I think that is so key. You said that you have to not be satisfied with that. Like you don't want to be satisfied with just living in the chaos that can be feelings.
Yeah.
Because as someone who feels a lot of feelings and has gotten sucked into the spiral of a lot of feelings, and I mean, like that is a normal human experience. It's sometimes easier to just get in the whirlpool and stay in the whirlpool.
Yeah.
And because it takes a lot of effort to maneuver yourself out. Like it's not necessarily an intuitive, easy process. It requires work and Jesus, truly. And I think you present that really well in the book, in the realm of, yeah, you can just live in there. You could live in the mess, but you won't be, oh gosh, this is gonna sound so dumb. But like
Say it.
you
Yeah.
won't be living your best life, you know?
Dude, that's one of the fears, right?
Uh,
Like of writing this book. I think I had an audience in mind, and the audience is not my peers, you
right.
know? Although there are plenty of my peers that I think need to push into this. But like one of the biggest fears I had was like people are going to be like, "Oh, this is living your best life" type stuff. And I think sometimes as Christians we're afraid of what other people are going to say and we avoid that. No, this is actually stuff Jesus talks about. The Bible is very transparent about. And there is a better way to live and to feel and to avoid that part of our faith by going like, "Oh, well, it's not all
Happy,
prosperity
crappy. Yeah.
gospel. Yeah, no, if you follow Jesus, everything's going to be great, and it's going to be wonderful." Of course it's not. It's a mess. And Jesus promised that we're going to have trouble. But he also said, I've overcome and that you can take heart. And so don't, this is a terrible sentence, don't not take heart
Mm.
because somebody somewhere made you feel like, well, your faith's not really about making you feel good. The subtitle of the book, right? Embracing all of it, how our faith makes us feel better. There have been a lot of people that I think probably have been on the, you know, I'm not sure where they are spiritually, that have bought the book and have mentioned that subtitle to me. And I found that very interesting. I almost didn't put that subtitle in there only because of how other pastors would respond to it, how our faith makes us feel better. But our faith does make us feel better. It doesn't make it great all the time.
No, but I think I mean, you can completely say, no, this is theologically weird if it is. I mean, that's part of what faith is that Jesus died for us to make a way for us to live better, to be with him, which is essentially living our best life.
Yeah.
There is a nugget of truth in the live your best life of like in Jesus,
Yeah.
that is how we can live our best life. And that our faith should inform every aspect of our life,
Yep. I think
and
the hang up comes when people try to define what your best life is. Your best life is
sure,
not
yeah,
having tons of money. It's not
yes,
easy street. It's
yeah,
not,
it's not having perfect circumstances, it's what you do with the circumstances.
yeah.
And I mean, and I think that's what's beautiful about this book is that, you lay out every chapter kind of does focus on a certain emotion, and then you kind of essentially show us where that emotion is in the Bible with these real people who experience this. The Bible isn't just, it's living and
Yeah.
active.
You know where that came from? The chapters. So I kind of like did it back. So I spent a period of time where I was not close to God at all. I didn't pray much, and like some time at the end of my high school and beginning of college, like I just didn't want anything to do with the church or really our faith. And I had faith and it was still there, and the faith that I expressed was not gone, but I was just completely disconnected. But I had a Bible that I don't know, one of my parents probably gave to me. And I don't know if you've ever had one of these Bibles. In the back of it, it just had, if you're feeling dot, dot, dot. Do you ever have
Yes,
one of those?
yes,
And it
yep,
was like, if you're feeling sad. And then it
yep.
would just list references. If you're feeling lonely, it just so when I was the furthest from God, I would still pick up that Bible if I was feeling it, flip to the back, find I'm feeling lonely.
Yep.
Girlfriend just broke up with me or
Yeah.
something. Jen dumped me.
Yeah.
Like I feel I feel lonely, and I would flip to those verses and I would read them.
Mhm.
Sometimes they made sense, sometimes they didn't, but I felt some comfort in that, and I felt less alone, and I felt like maybe God was with me, and and there was like a period of years where that's probably my only interaction with the Bible, but it
Mm.
was meaningful, and I think it really sustained me through that season and had something to do with bringing me back. So when I was like, what if there's a whole book like that? What if instead of in the back, there's a front that says, I feel, sad, or I feel angry, or whatever. And so that's the table of contents. And like, I kind of tried to write it. So if you were just feeling one of those things, you could pick it up. I gave it to somebody really close to me at this Christmas shindig, and he picks it up, and like, he's like in the very middle of the book within minutes. I'm like,
Mhm.
dude, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm reading the I feel stuck chapter. I'm like, that's because
That's,
you feel stuck.
yep.
And that's kind of what that like where the another reason the book is what it is and why it's laid out the way it's laid out.
Yeah, and I actually would recommend people doing that in the realm of like, yeah, I read it in like a week and a half straight through, and that was a great experience. But I think if you want to dig in and like really process, you have great discussion questions that you could do with a group or just your own self, is to just kind of take it chunk by chunk and really
Yeah.
like process and stuff. And I do want to get into some of the things you touch on in some of these chapters that I really resonated with. But I think whenever we talk about mental health, we got to say like, yes, Josh and I have a lot of experience with feeling these feelings, and
Yeah.
both of us have been in therapy or currently are in therapy. And
Yep.
so we are not medical professionals. And hopefully, like, we want you to come away from this conversation feeling seen and empowered to like dive into some of these things. But we definitely would hope that you walk away thinking, I need Josh's book. And also, I should talk to somebody,
Yeah.
like go try to find a good therapist, go talk to your doctor, go talk to somebody you love. So again, we're not giving necessarily medical advice, but
Right. I think I expressed that pretty
yes, you
strongly in the
absolutely did.
book.
Yes, I
In
just want to make
fact,
it clear here.
um, yeah, like go to counseling,
Yeah.
like, and that goes back to the very beginning thing. What gets in the way? And I know so many people who are struggling so bad. They won't talk to their spouse about what they're really going through. They won't talk to their family doctor. It's appalling. And by the way, if you're a guy listening to this, and I don't know if this is a gender thing or I just maybe my conversations with guys, maybe this is an everybody thing. And Emily, you can speak to that in a second. But like, if you're a guy and listening to this, I have been appalled at the amount of guys I have met since writing this book who have talked to me or wanted to talk to me about what's going on in their heart. I'm not appalled by that. I'm grateful for that. I love that. I'm appalled when I go, hey, so have you talked to your family doctor about this?
Mm.
Like, that's my first question before going to a counselor. If you have a good family doctor, they're going to push you right to counseling.
Mhm.
That's what mine did. I mentioned him. Shout out Dr. Gorski, Pine Grove, PA. Get a doctor and like go to counseling. You don't have to be afraid of the stigma. And unfortunately, that stigma is perpetuated in churches, but it shouldn't be anymore. Go to counseling, talk to somebody. You don't have to hide how you're really feeling because you're an elder in the church or a pastor
Mhm.
or a leader or an attender or a member or because people think you have it all together spiritually. In my family growing up, they would always just be like, "Oh, he's just going through something." You know, Poppy's just
Just
going through something. That wasn't the exact phrase. It'll come to me later.
yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, no, you're not. You're not just going through something. You got some issues you got to talk about. Go talk about them.
I've always had a really good view of counseling. I've had family members do that when it was not super socially acceptable, especially in the church. So I've always had such a positive view, but it took me 37 years of my life to get to a point where I am now in therapy. And I can tell you from experience, yes, it is so helpful to talk about things that have happened in the past and process them with somebody. But I cannot tell you how many times I have been like, man, I wish that I had done it sooner so that I could have talked to this person as it was happening. It would have saved me a lot of
Yeah, right.
strife, meant like internal strife, had I just said sooner, like I or acted on it soon. Like I've always thought, like, oh yeah, I would benefit from therapy, but I just never did it. I
Yeah.
don't know whether it was like a Yeah, it's like a monetary thing or like,
There's tons of excuses people
yeah,
throw out.
yes, tons of
Like, listen,
excuses.
I get it. I went to a counselor out of state online because I was
Hmm.
afraid of people seeing my
Hmm.
car parked out in a parking lot. Give me a break. That was so stupid. I mean, I'm grateful for that because that counselor ended up being absolutely awesome and helped me a ton. And I think the other thing too is people don't understand. There's like the post trauma type stuff that counseling can give you so much help walking through. There's the middle of it, which you just mentioned, which really helps you process as you are going through it. And that is life giving. But there's also like the preventative part too, where like
Yes,
stay in touch, like, like every once in a while, go for a checkup. It helps prepare you for trouble that's inevitably going to come. The other thing I think people that aren't in it don't understand is that it's not the same conversation over and over. You're not just talking
no,
about how you feel sad or you feel, unless you have an absolutely terrible therapist, which
yeah,
I assume there are some terrible therapists out there because
yep.
there's terrible everything out there. But people don't understand too is that they're giving you tools, and those tools are helping you. You're using those tools and you're growing and you're implementing them. And then you have setbacks, but it's kind of like a build.
I have homework sometimes to do,
Yeah, right?
and I've also found like the things that she has taught me has been helpful like in talking to my children, like who children are
Yes.
always going to struggle with these things. As a parent, it's partly my job to teach them how to do this well, how to process their own feelings well. And sometimes that's really overwhelming when you, the parent, is like feels like you're drowning.
Yeah.
But it's to be able to have the tools to then explain to them and model to them is just wonderful.
Yeah.
And one of the things I loved about your book is that I felt like it was like I was recognizing things that my therapist has said to me, like
Yeah.
in what you said. And so it truly is like solid stuff. But let's jump in. One of the
Okay.
first some chapters to start, like you said, there's fear. You say in that chapter, the problem is when fear moves from something that informs us to something that drives our lives. And you later say that we have to get our fears out of the driver's seat. And that completely describes how anxiety and worry and fear get expressed. Like they are just controlling me, my
Yeah.
thoughts, like everything. What do you do with that?
Man, like my fear when it drives, it's not driving like a Volvo. It's like driving a dump truck. So, yeah, my fear is like when I'm teaching my teenagers how to drive and I'd rather
Yes.
spend them to school because I'm afraid for my life. Like
Yes.
that's how bad a driver fear is for me. And how do you get that out of the driver's seat of your life? I mean, fear is an important part of life, right? It's a God-given protective part of our design and it informs our fight and flight. But the problem is we instead of letting it inform our decisions, we let it control our decisions. It's kind of like the driver's seat
Hmm.
kind of analogy there. And I think getting it out of the driver's seat is a bit of a battle where you kind of got to be on top of it. You got to be paying attention to fear, and that's where like preemptive work in regards to fear I think is super important.
Hmm.
I'm gonna feel these fears. Pastors, you're gonna feel fears about leaving your job, retiring, passing it on to somebody
Hmm.
else. There's gonna be fears parenting that are gonna come up. Fear of failing your kids, fear of, somehow ruining their lives, or whatever. And I think when it comes to fear for me, and I think it's different for everybody, but I think being able to understand fears that I'm prone to, like I'm prone to a fear of failure. I don't ever want to fail. I don't want to disappoint people. Like that's a big part of who I am. Knowing that, being self-aware of that, paying attention to how what God says about that kind of fear, knowing other characters that have carried that kind of fear helps you build courage. And the more you build courage, the less fear starts to drive. It's driving. I don't think it's like a kick them out of the driver's seat. Yeah. So like Esther does, that's the story I use to talk about fear. And I think you see her fear expressed through the process, but you also see her courage growing. And it's a process of moving fear out of the driver's seat. I can't go talk to the king. He'll kill me, you know. Then little bit by little bit by little bit, and then her courage is growing. So I think that's a process of kind of like moving fear out of the driver's seat, and it has to do with building courage, not just removing fear.
Right, because like you said, there are some elements of fear that are necessary to life to preserve our lives, like we
Yeah.
can't just so it's the exercising those muscles to differentiate between the two.
Courage grows.
Hmm.
Courage grows, and it grow like you ever see somebody like walk through something, and then you just from observing what they're going through, like a child fighting cancer, like at my brother's funeral, he died in a car accident. Other people that came through that had lost children or brothers, like just seeing them builds courage, and then taking small courageous steps in the middle of fear builds courage, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, fear doesn't have so much control over my life.
Hmm. I think with a lot of this, it's so interesting. All of our circumstances are going to vary, so it's sometimes hard to like look at other people or stories in the Bible and think like, yeah, if I do it just like them, it will turn out okay. It's not always prescriptive, it's descriptive, and it's
Right.
mostly descriptive of who God is and what that faith helps us in those
Yeah, I
circumstances.
love that. It's who he is and who we are to him,
Hmm.
and what his promises are in the middle of all that.
Yeah, and that's going to look different in all of our stories.
Yeah.
You did mention this a little bit earlier talking about fear, but so when I read the I feel anxious chapter, I just
Yeah.
felt so seen because sometimes when you're like, when you feel things, for me, it's specifically anxiety, I just think like I'm aware enough to be like, this feeling I understand is so out there and is not rational, but like I cannot get out of it. So like the fact that
Yeah.
like I read some of these things and I was just like, yes, like I have felt that exact same thing, was really comforting. And I think people who read this book will see that in any chapter, like I think they
Yeah.
will find themselves, which I think is so valuable. But you talk about how our bodies can't differentiate our imagined future and our current circumstances.
Yeah.
And I'm like the queen of imagined future. It's like that. That's one of my downfalls in anxiety is that like I take a circumstance and then run it down the line of this is what's going to happen. And,
Yeah.
that's why I really appreciated like your very practical advice in that chapter, which was the breath acronym. And can you explain a little bit about that?
I don't know if you've ever had, I want to just be careful. I don't want to say the wrong thing here,
Hmm.
because anxiety is such a individual, very personal, very hard. I mean, very hard. That's why I kind of like use analogies to describe. Like to me, it feels like drowning,
Hmm.
with waves just crashing onto you
Yep.
over and over. And they don't even have to be big waves. They could just be small. But if you don't have your footing, I don't talk about this in the book, but people have asked me how it's going with anxiety since I started talking about my own battle with it. And always say it feels like you're holding a poisonous snake by the tail. It feels like I'm holding a poisonous snake by the tail.
Hmm.
Like I got it right now, but a little slip and that thing's going to come back and bite me again. So I try to be very careful when I'm talking about anxiety. The acronym in the book is something that I came up with trying to find but acronyms for anxiety is a pretty common thing.
Yes.
I couldn't list another acronym, but I know they're out there. I know there's acronyms out there to help kids deal with anxiety. I know there's acronyms out there. And at one point, I think Jen was the one who had mentioned the idea of an acronym to me. And I thought, I want something like that I can remember to help me take a breath and maybe stop the physical reaction and slow that down and maybe bring it backwards a little bit to help. And so it's actually an acronym that I have practiced
Hmm.
for a while. Breath. B stands for be still. And I've tried to take these all from like, what's a scriptural understanding, an acronym that we can use in anxiety. Re, R. I don't have the references in front of me. They're in the book, but
Hmm.
remember God. That we often are out racing our own thoughts when it comes to anxiety. I have, like you, I've recorded videos to my children because I thought I was dying, from silly things after spending hours and hours on WebMD,
WebMD. Yeah.
like just going down the rabbit hole. So part of that to combat like that future drive into an imagined future, I think it's really important to remember what God has done for us and who he is. And so that's the R part. E is,
Evaluate your space.
yeah. So E is evaluate your space. And that's really important just in general. Like, because anxiety is telling you you aren't safe, and sometimes you might not be safe. So after I settle down and I remember God's with me, I'm not in this by myself. He's got me this far, he'll get me further. Evaluate my space. Am I safe? And knowing that I'm safe helps so much. One of the stories I tell is about Jen, and I was having a panic attack in a grocery store. Fortunately, she's wise enough and understanding enough of this. She was like, "You're safe right now, and you're coming home. Like, just
Hmm.
leave the grocery cart. You're safe in this store. You're gonna be safe in your car, and you're gonna get home, and you're gonna be safe here. It's okay." So that has to do with evaluating your space. But the last thing I want anybody to do is to practice a stupid acronym if they're in an abusive relationship and they're not
Right.
safe, or they're in a situation where they should be, their fight
Right.
or flight should be kicking in.
Yes. Hmm.
And then the A is ask God to lead you in a new direction. This is right out of David in the Psalms. Just asking him to lead us into that future in a new way than our thoughts are leading us. And then the T is talk to someone. And then H is healthy activity. And I feel weird, like healthy activity doesn't sound, it sounds so like, like what's the verse for that, healthy activity. But, God, it's something that's important and definitely shown as examples in scripture and stuff. So, yeah, so that's the acronym breath. Take a breath.
And I think that, again, just that is full of wise scriptural advice, wise, just normal, like any therapist, any doctor would tell you, yes, move your body. That will
Yeah.
help you regulate take a glass of water, like drink some water, So those are like such practical, good things that we often forget, either in a like, I need to hyper spiritualize this because I know it's like born out of, things that aren't grounded in my faith or whatever.
Yeah.
We need to sync all of those and utilize all of those resources that we have available to us
Yeah. I'm
to,
trying not to like hyper spiritualize anything in this book, which
no,
is
and you
also a
don't.
fear of mine. Because the last thing that somebody needs that's going through some heavy stuff is like bumper sticker theology. Like that's just not helpful to anybody. I think it makes the person dishing out the weak advice feel better, but maybe that's it. And the last thing I want to do is like go, you're really struggling with anxiety. Well, you just need to be still and know that, know God. Just throw the verse at him. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I have found this like stuff that has worked with my own anxiety. Like sometimes I just get to R and I already start to
Mhm.
feel better.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes me all the way to H and I got to go walk outside for an hour, So I hope that it doesn't come across as like placating, over spiritualized sayings, just thrown at people.
I did not experience that. I think partly because you share so much personal experience in this book. So like this is literally drawn from you live these
Yeah.
are the things that have helped you.
Here's another really important piece of information that you need to know from our sponsor, TEDS. That's who we lovingly call Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. They're located in Chicago, but they have their courses and content accessible for you wherever you are via the internet. So convenient. I went off the rails there.
Hey, it's the internet. It's distracting for everybody.
The internet is a huge distraction.
Hmm. But you could be distracted in a good way by taking seminary classes at TEDS.
Yes, and you don't have to like sign up for a degree. They
No,
offer
just-
graduate certificates that start at $170 a credit.
It's amazing.
That's like 2 tanks of gas. Okay, I drive a big Tahoe.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are you driving?
Oh man, you could totally do it. $170 a credit for a graduate certificate. Get started. The certificates usually are 12 credits long, and the credits can be if at some point you decide you want to continue on and get your master's degree, these credits will all transfer right into a master's program. So you can
It's amazing.
test the waters of education. If you're thinking, hey, maybe I want to get a master's, an MDiv or something in ministry, test it out with the certificate program, and then if you decide, you can transfer those credits over. It's a great, convenient, affordable way to start your secondary education. Get all the information you need at teds.edu/churchchat. That's teds.edu/churchchat.
In the I Feel Worn Out chapter,
Yeah.
I loved it because it reminded me of one of my favorite movies. I'm assuming you've seen What About Bob?
Oh my gosh. What about Bob? I think when my dad passed away, I think I found three of them in his. He loved that movie. He
Oh,
would
baby steps.
quote
Yep.
that movie all the time. It
Yep.
was it was by far his
That's
favorite
so good.
movie.
Well,
Yeah.
there actually is like a lot of good mental health gold in that movie now that I'm thinking about it. But the I Feel Worn Out chapter specifically reminded me of this one bit in the movie because you in that chapter you talk about developing rhythms of rest and you touch on the fact that that goes for both like physical. I mean, I think we often think about like physically, like oh, you need to physically rest, but it goes for mentally too. And so in the movie, and maybe I can find a clip that we can link to, but if people have not seen this movie, but Dr. Marvin writes Bob a script for taking a vacation from his problems.
Yes. I remember that.
Yeah,
I
and then he's
remember that
just like,
scene.
I'm taking a vacation
And he
from my
shows
problems.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, and it's so good. But I loved how you gave some examples in the book how you can purposely take Sabbath from kind of more abstract
Yeah.
things. You know, like I could take a Sabbath from complaining. I personally could take a Sabbath from worrying about my health. I could take a Sabbath from reading Twitter. You know, like you can do things that aren't necessarily a cop out, but give you that breathing space to,
Yeah. Just create a little,
oh, you
because
know,
it's a
yeah.
cycle, right? Like those things easily become, like, even work just
Hmm.
becomes habitual, kind of like cycle of just doing, 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 doing. And Sabbath is like, hey, stop doing. There's
Hmm.
bigger and more important things to connect with than just what you're kind of, the rabbit hole you're running down, or the rat race you're stuck in. And
Hmm.
I thought, man, how do you apply that? I need a break from myself sometimes.
Hmm.
That's where that part of that book came from. It's from me going like, hey, I can take a break from worrying today. I can worry tomorrow, which there's a whole chapter on worry, so don't
Yeah.
judge that sentence. But like, maybe I need to take a break and shut my mouth and stop complaining about all the stuff I'm complaining about. And maybe if I do that, maybe I'll see something better,
Hmm.
different. Sabbath for me is hard. I have to be reminded to take breaks, to slow down. I remember a mutual friend of ours, Eddie Cole, one time telling me, like, hey, Josh, you don't have to hit home runs every time.
Hmm.
And I was offended and angry at him for saying that. I was like, I told him later, like, dude,
Yeah.
that ticked me off. He's like, well, you can bunt. I'm like, I don't want to bunt. I want to hit a home run. Like, I don't want to slow down. I want to go fast.
Hmm.
So I need that reminder. And for me, what I think you see in that chapter with some of those smaller things, like my process of saying, I'm not always good at this, so I need to take bite-sized pieces and build on them. I need to
Hmm.
just stop complaining for a day, and then I need to stop doing something else, and then I need to just build on it. I think I even say in there, like, start with 5 minutes or 15 minutes
Hmm.
and just go from there.
Yeah, it reminded me of something that my therapist legit told me to do when I was like kind of fixating on something that I was worrying about. She's like, is the time you spent worrying about it, is that going to change it? Are you able to actually change it by worrying? And I was like,
Yeah.
well, no, I can't. She's like, okay, what would it look like if you set a time, pick a time every day, like say noon,
Yeah.
and you will give yourself 15 minutes at noon to worry and do all of your mental machinations for 15 minutes. And anytime outside of that, you can just you can punt it. You're like, oh, this is not my worrying time. Like I'll wait until noon. And
Yeah, I
she's
like
like,
it.
and I did that a couple times. And then exactly like she said, it's like the time you spend ruminating will be less every time. And also at some point, you won't need that noon bell. Like you will just,
Yeah.
it's because you realize it's not worth it. So, and it just reminded me of that, like, yes, I could take a vacation from my worry, except at noon, from noon to 12:15, and that's it, like, and those just simple things are really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's good.
So when you're dealing with mental health issues and struggles or just feelings in general, I think it's not tempting. It just happens that they're just everything feels magnified and bigger than what it actually is. And it feels like you need like this big change or this
Yeah.
big tool or big something to move forward or see the light at the end of the tunnel. So in the overwhelm chapter, you talk about Elisha and how he's just a regular guy doing the next right thing. And it makes me want to sing that song from Frozen, but I will abstain so that I don't offend anybody's ears.
No, which song from
It's
Frozen?
called The Next Right Thing. The
How's it
next
go?
right. I'm not going to sing it.
I
Um,
almost had it, just a
I know you
little.
almost had it, but you've seen that movie, right? It's
Yes,
from
I was just
Frozen too.
trying to
Okay.
get you to sing it.
Okay.
I have
Um,
two daughters. I've
I
seen
know I
that
was gonna
movie. So.
say, okay. So he did these small actions. He offered small prayers, which I loved you talking about because I am also I am not I get very intimidated by prayer and feel like it needs to be this perfect articulate thing. And clearly anybody listening to this podcast knows I am not always the most articulate. So he just chose the small things. Is that something you're good at?
I hope I'm getting better at it. You know, in the
Okay.
beginning where you said where you quoted me, and it was something I forget the exact quote unless I look at it, even though I wrote it. But Jesus is revolutionizing.
Yes.
He revolutionized how I feel, but also is revolutionizing how I think or how I
Yes.
interact with those feelings. This is a chapter where that's like part of that journey, like in a huge way. He has been revolutionizing this part of me so that I am getting way better at it. That's a great story from Second Kings chapter 6. Elisha's servant comes out, right? And he's like, I love telling this story, but I won't do it for time's sake. He comes out, he's overwhelmed as he sees the armies of Aram up on
Yes.
the hill. And then Elisha prays a short prayer, almost like he can't be bothered. Like that's the vibe I get from Elisha this whole time. Is like,
Hmm.
kind of like meh. Well, this is gonna be a cool thing for you to see, but
Yeah.
it's almost like he's not even super excited about it. But he just does. He just prays that his servant would have their eyes open. Real short prayer. They come down and he they're blinded and he leads them to Samaria and they're surrounded. And then the king asks him if you should kill them all. He says, no, let's just feed them and let them go. Like it
Hmm.
was such a fun story. And I think I'm trying to live more like that, especially in regards to feeling overwhelmed and all
Mm.
these feelings like, what's the bite sized thing right now I can do?
Yep.
I can't take it all on. And we try to. I mean, there's so many people going through mental health stuff and I've done this. We think we need something big because we're feeling big emotions like you just mentioned. And we go for something big and it usually does not help. It usually makes instead of doing the simple thing like calling your doctor
Right.
or picking up the phone or going on BetterHelp or something or finding a counselor. Instead of you're shooting for some big epic spiritual moment, instead of just praying a little prayer, reading one little verse, doing something
Hmm.
small. And for me, the way out of being overwhelmed and even dealing with some of these other feelings, not even the way out of the way through, is just take it one step at a time.
Baby steps.
What,
Just like
yeah,
what about
that's
Bob?
from What About
Baby
Bob?
steps.
Baby
Yes.
steps to the car, baby
Yes.
steps to the.
Baby steps are on the window. Yeah.
I have got to watch that. I'm gonna watch that
Uh,
with my kids. They're
yes.
they're older now. They're ready for What About Bob?
For what about Bob? Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, baby steps. It's like
No, wait,
again,
what's
yeah,
that
we
lake? Lake Winnipesaukee?
like Winnipesaukee.
Is that
I think you need like a little puppet of yourself, like Dr.
like in
Marmon
that?
has. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think we want these like big systems. That's what we think is going to make it better, but it truly is just putting one foot in front of the other. Start small, baby step.
Yeah.
One last thing
Yeah.
that I really want to talk about. When you in the I'm not enough chapter, is that what it is? I feel like not enough. I was reading that and I was like yelling at you
Oh
internally from my
boy.
head because you go through like some scenarios in which you feel like you're not enough.
Yeah.
And the premise initially is that you are enough.
Mm.
And I was like putting like from my perspective of like if I was feeling those things, I would be like, yeah, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. Like, and I just wanted to yell at you of like, no, you're not enough, like, and I'm so glad that you kind of wrapped it up by talking about the paradox of specifically
Yeah.
that, but I think the paradox of all feelings, and it spills into your last chapter on hope for me too, of like a lot of these things, if you are a person of faith, you inherently, we live in a broken world. We are not perfect people. So we are not enough.
Yeah.
And yet we are created by God
Mm.
and in his image, and he loves us. So we are enough
Mm.
because we have him. We can't do it on our own, but because we have him, we are enough. And I think that's really difficult. I think for believers in particular, maybe if you don't have that perspective of faith, it's easier. I don't know, but like wrestling and finding a good, healthy middle ground between those, because I think I'm the type of person who swings, my pendulum swings to the like, I'm not enough because everything's broken and I know that I'm broken and am not good enough to like I need Jesus, which is
Yeah.
that is true, but he's also
Empowered
given
you,
me,
given you the Holy Spirit,
yes, to be
called you.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
like
like,
Ephesians 1 stuff and like yeah, so like that's a beautiful I see it's so I love the mess and embracing like all of it, right? And you are enough preaches so easy. And you got people that preach you are enough. And it's sexy sounding and people leave feeling really good about themselves.
yeah,
And then you got people that preach you aren't enough and you're broken. And that's true. They're both true. And like that preaches and there's it's right and but if that's all you're preaching, like the beauty is found in both of those truths. I'm not enough on my own. I am enough through Christ. I don't care what I have to go through. It's his strength in me, it's his power in me. I'm designed by him. I have a purpose, and that's a beautiful thing. And I'm also broken, and that's freeing too because I don't have to hold it all together. And maybe that's the verse that captures it all. I don't have the reference right popping in my head. I just did not drink enough coffee today. I just used it in a sermon though, not that long ago. But it says, I think it might be in Second Corinthians. You'll have to fact check this.
yeah,
Maybe
just
not.
shoot it out and then we'll,
Where Jesus, it talks about him creating all things, and in him all things are held together.
hmm
And so there's this beauty in knowing, like, I don't have to hold it all together. I'm broken. I can't really hold it all together because I'm not enough. But I have Jesus, and Jesus holds it all together, and he is enough, and he makes me enough. And so I can come out of that conversation after failing. I think I mentioned a conversation I had with my counselor in that chapter where I felt like a failure as a dad.
hmm
And he's like, yeah, it's okay. You have. And I'm like, you're a terrible therapist. And he's like, no, dude. And did your parents ever fail you? And I'm
hmm
like, yeah. And he's like, and did you love them? Were they great parents? I'm like, yeah. And so that's like capturing that, like, I'm broken and that's okay. I'm not enough.
hmm
But I'm also, when I understand who Christ is and what he's doing in me and through me, I am enough. So I think that's a beautiful, like, messy middle to be in.
It's
And they're
beautiful.
both,
It's just hard,
it's
especially
hard.
for people who are very black and white.
And there
I'm
might
pointing to
be,
myself.
as you. And
Yeah.
so maybe for you, it's a matter of discerning with God what he wants you to hear. They're both true. They're both scriptural. There are times in scripture where the reminder is clearly that you don't, you're broken and you need to depend on me. And there's times where it's like, hey, just bring me what you have
hmm
and watch this.
I think that about like the hope chapter as well, like in the I tend to be the person who focuses on the realities of, yeah, my worst case scenario, that imagined future that I have spiraled on,
Yeah.
legit could happen. It could, because bad things do happen. And yet I can have hope.
Hmm.
And is that hope enough? Is that hope enough to make the bad thing okay? And then I think that
Mm.
goes back to the like the small steps. Like there is nothing helpful about about taking those big leaps, but focusing on our daily bread of what God is giving us today. You know,
Yeah.
that's a muscle that I need to exercise more. The paradox of feelings, man, it's tough. It's tough.
Yes, tough stuff. And hope, I don't think it's not how big your hope is, right? It's
Mm-mm.
how big what you're placing your little bit of hope in is.
Yes,
The little stuff. What about, I'm going to be quoting What About Bob now because of you. Baby steps.
baby steps.
Like just start with a little bit of hope, just put it in a really big God. And maybe part of the breakdown for people of faith who maybe really aren't experiencing some of the stuff in the middle of hardship is you have big hope but a little view of God. Like
Mm.
you can one of the things I see like where it breaks down for a lot of people is you believe in God, but Jesus, but you're not letting him inform how you live in the middle of this stuff.
Yeah, that was something I underlined. It
And
was you can believe in Jesus but not learn from him.
and you see that when people are spinning out and acting crazy and yet calling themselves Christians and you're like, "What? How is that the Jesus that doesn't look like the Jesus
Yeah.
I see in scripture?"
This is something I challenge myself on and catch myself more often than I'd love to admit that I have made God into somebody like me that
Mm,
also freaks out about diagnoses or,
yeah.
he doesn't think the way I think at all. Praise the Lord. He functions on a whole different level
That
than me.
really yeah, that thought really messed with me writing the chapter where I talk about Job. I
Hmm.
think that's the sadness chapter.
Oh, yep.
And when I was like, there's a part in there that I talked about how God knew where his sons and daughters were.
Hmm.
I had a really hard time putting that on paper because but it's important because like it's true and that's who he is and that's what the reality of the circumstance. But I think I had a hard time putting that, down just because like, man, I've been in the middle of such devastating grief
Mm.
and it does give me comfort to know where my mom and where my brother and where my father are. I didn't want that to like minimize somebody's grief, but it's also a truth that can really help us walk through it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
So I don't know why I just really struggled with putting that those couple of lines in that chapter about sadness. It's not to make your sadness go away, but it is to give you some assurance that God is not you. And he sees this from a different perspective than you're seeing it.
Mhm.
And what you think is your end of the story isn't
And that's what
anyway.
gives us hope, that he isn't, we aren't
Yeah.
the same.
And this is this I feel I feel like this is just a messy thing to talk about.
It
And
is, it's all messy.
I hope the book helps some people. I would say especially to our leaders in churches that maybe are listening to this, you don't need to read the book, but you need to be talking about this stuff with people. And I don't care what form you put that in, like how you package it, how you want to preach it or teach it. The feedback from talking about this stuff out loud, transparently in front of people has been overwhelming. We had a local Christian counselor call and leave a message on her office phone thanking us for talking about this stuff. Doesn't come to our church. I think we send some people their way once in a while, but like wherever you land on it, this is something that I think needs to be a conversation that churches are having and leaders are modeling without fear of what it says about them. God's
Yes.
so transparent, right? Like the book tells stories from the Bible because God is so well because it's true, but like what I love about it incorporating those stories is God is so transparent about this real hard stuff that real people in pretty big positions and going through pretty big stuff are dealing with. And he doesn't hide it. He doesn't brush it up. He doesn't make it look pretty. Just right there in scripture, raw. And like it says in Timothy, for our good, for our use.
Hmm. So we would encourage you. Well, I would encourage you. Josh can sell his own self, but I will sell him too. Well, it's not sell him, sell the book. Definitely pick it up, read it with a group. I think that would be a really great way to do that so that you can find people to talk about it with. And if you're a part of our district, EFCA East, we have counseling resources for you. If you are a leader, pastor, and if they don't have availability, we will point you in the right direction. I know people up in New York that could help you. I know Josh has people in Pennsylvania that could be helpful to you. So speak up. Don't just suffer alone, or don't stew in your own weird feelings alone. Where can people buy your book?
So right now, this is like indie author world. So you can get it on my website, which is joshuaott.us. And if you just go to my website, it's pretty easy to find the book. And that's the only place it's available now. Eventually, it'll be available wherever you want to buy books. But for right now, that's where you can get a copy.
Super exciting.
Just hope it helps. There's discussion questions in there, whatever. And if you don't have money and you want to see a copy of it, maybe shoot me a message.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're going to wrap up our episode like we always wrap up our episodes.
Oh, man.
And you probably didn't even think about one. You're so focused
not.
on your 2 truths and a lie.
Yes.
Do you have anything that you're loving?
That I'm loving right now?
Mm-hmm.
I'm loving the support of great teams.
Mm.
You know, I'm in the middle of a lot. So we got the book. I have a team of people that help me with that. I have district stuff. I was just meeting with our district leadership last week. Well, maybe 2 weeks ago now. And I have an amazing, we're going through like a big move at church, and it's all very overwhelming. But I have such a good team. They love each other. They love Jesus. They love the people. They're doing incredible work on every level of these good teams. So I'm just super thankful I'm loving that. I'm not in any of this by myself.
I love that. Kind of along the mental health lines. I have completely removed myself from social media for maybe almost a year now.
Good for you.
Yeah. And again, this is not prescriptive. It's just descriptive of what has really been helpful to me in this weird season of, for me, grief and overwhelm and dealing with some stuff. So that has been really helpful. And so I would just encourage anybody, like, I love the mental space that it provides. I love that I definitely have an addictive personality. So this is a way I can have a good boundary, is just not having it available to me at all.
That's so cool.
So yeah, like, it's just been great. So I would just encourage anybody to not necessarily do that, but like make choices that are going to be good for you.
Yeah. Love it.
It's been great.
Well, listen, thank you, Emily, for this. Her idea, not mine. Not mine.
Yep. I love talking about books. I like talking about mental health. So this was perfect.
And I hope the book helps some people out there. Thanks for indulging this conversation, listeners. I hope it in some way was maybe meaningful or encouraging to you. And we don't have like a fancy way of saying goodbye. So we'll just say, see you later.
Bye.
The Church Head Podcast is for educational purposes only. We dive deep into important and sometimes sensitive conversations and topics about life in ministry. Please know that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely the views and the opinions of the guests and the hosts, and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for. Nor should our views or opinions be considered a full perspective of circumstances that may be mentioned in this podcast. Our perspectives are limited, and so will be this podcast. What we hope to do is have conversations and spark greater conversations that will lead leaders and their organizations towards greater health. The Church Chat Podcast is edited by Emily Gardner and produced by Emily Gardner and Josh Ott. The Church Chat Podcast is supported by EFCA East, an Eastern District of the Evangelical Free Church of America, covering 6 states. EFCA East helps leaders live well, lead well, and multiply, helping churches find new vitality and multiply transformational churches on the East Coast. The EFCA is multiplying transformational churches among all people. For more information, visit efcaeast.com. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and can't wait to see you on the next Church Chat episode.